In this tutorial, we're going to create a realistic parallax animation using simple layers and learn how to use an After Effects camera to add depth and cinematic movement. Let's jump right in. I'll upload the image to Adobe Firefly and choose the Generative Remove tool. Now I'll simply paint over the front column and then over the tree. And Firefly intelligently fills the missing areas by creating new background content that blends naturally with the rest of the image. Once you're happy with the result, download the cleaned image. Now let's extract the tree from the image and choose the Remove Background option. Firefly automatically detects the main subject and removes everything else, giving us a clean cutout of the tree. If needed, you can refine the edges for a cleaner result. Once it's ready, download the extracted tree as a transparent PNG. We'll place it back into our composition later as a separate foreground layer. Let's import the images and organize everything. Unlike the tree, we'll use a manual masking technique directly in After Effects. This is useful when you need more control or when an object has clean, well-defined edges. Using the pen tool, I'll carefully trace around the column to create a precise mask. We can modify the masking later also, but for this layer you need to mask it correctly. Once the mask is complete, the column becomes its own separate foreground element. By combining Adobe Firefly's AI-powered tools with traditional masking techniques, you get the best of both worlds. Speed where AI works well, and complete control where manual refinement produces the best result. I'll upload the cleaned image to Adobe Firefly once again and use the Generative Fill tool. First, I'll select the missing area where the column was covering the scene. Then I'll leave the prompt empty so Firefly analyzes the surrounding image and naturally extends the water and background. After generating a few variations, I'll choose the result that blends best with the original image. This gives us a complete background with continuous water and scenery, ensuring there are no empty gaps when the camera moves through the scene in After Effects. Next, let's extract the mountain. I'll upload the image to Adobe Firefly once again and use the Remove Background tool. In this case, Firefly does a great job of detecting the mountain, giving us a clean cutout with very little effort. One important thing to remember is that there isn't a single right approach. Sometimes AI tools produce excellent results in just a few seconds, while other times you'll get better accuracy by masking the object manually. The best technique always depends on the image you're working with, the complexity of the subject, and how well the AI understands the scene. A professional workflow is about choosing the method that gives you the cleanest result, not forcing one technique every time. Now that the mountain is extracted, we have another separate layer ready for our parallax composition. Now let's separate the road. Using the pen tool, I'll carefully trace around the road and include the small foreground details that should move together. Taking a little extra time here helps create a much more realistic depth effect later. Using the pen tool, I'll carefully mask around the group of houses, following their outline as accurately as possible. Since these are small objects, we don't need to be pixel perfect. Just make sure the overall shape looks clean. As we continue separating more elements, our flat image gradually transforms into a fully layered scene that's ready for a realistic cinematic parallax animation. Now that we've imported all our layers into After Effects, let's start assembling the scene. I'll begin by placing the water layer into the timeline. Notice that the edge where the water meets the surrounding landscape looks a little too sharp. Instead of feathering the entire mask, After Effects gives us a much more powerful option: Mask Feather Points. To use it, simply click on the sections of the mask where you want the feather to begin and drag the feather handles outward. Now, specific portions of the mask while leaving the rest of the edges perfectly sharp. This gives you much greater control and creates a far more natural blend between layers. I'll add a few feather points along the shoreline and gently adjust the feather until the transition looks smooth and realistic. This is one of those small techniques that can make a big difference in the final result, especially when you're building a believable parallax scene. Now that all of our layers are in place, it's time to transform this flat composition into a real 3D scene. The first step is to enable the 3D layer switch for each layer. Simply click the 3D layer icon, the small cube, next to every layer in the timeline. As soon as you enable the cube icon, the layer gains a third dimension. Instead of existing only on the X and Y axes, it can now move along the Z axis. Let's create a camera with 35mm lens. For more accurate placement, I'll switch the composition panel to 2 views. Next, let's position the road correctly in our 3D scene. Although we've converted the road into a 3D layer, it's still just a flat 2D image. To make it behave like an actual ground plane, we first need to rotate it until it's almost 90 degrees on the x-axis. Even after rotating it, the perspective may not match the rest of the scene. To fix this, I'll apply the corner pin effect and adjust each corner until the road naturally follows the perspective of the landscape. Using both views together helps ensure the road sits naturally on the ground, creating a much more convincing foundation for our parallax animation. Positioning layers in 3D space takes a bit of patience, so don't worry if it doesn't look perfect on your first attempt. Creating a convincing sense of depth usually involves making small adjustments to each layer's position, rotation, and scale. As you move one layer, you may need to fine-tune the others until everything feels natural from the camera's point of view. The more you practice, the more intuitive this process becomes. After a few projects, you'll start to judge depth and spacing almost instinctively, allowing you to build realistic 3D scenes much faster. Take your time with this step. It's the foundation of a great parallax animation, and the extra effort will really show in the final result. I'm using the Mask Feather tool to soften only the areas that need a smoother transition. Instead of affecting the entire mask, it allows me to adjust the feather exactly where it's needed, giving much more precise control. This helps the layers blend together naturally, while keeping the rest of the edges clean and well-defined. I'll create an adjustment layer and apply the curves effect. With a few subtle adjustments to the curve, I'll increase the overall contrast to give the scene a bit more depth and visual impact. Small color corrections like this can make the entire composition look richer and more cinematic without overdoing the effect. Now that our scene is fully assembled, it's time to bring it to life with a simple camera animation. Even subtle camera motion is enough to create a realistic cinematic parallax effect. To add even more realism, let's place a person walking along the road. I'll import a green screen clip of a person walking and drag it into the composition. The first step is to remove the green background. I'll apply the key light effect and use the eyedropper tool to sample the green screen. Next, I'll fine-tune the settings by adjusting the screen gain, screen balance, and the clip black and clip white values until we get a clean, solid matte. The goal is to remove the green without losing important details around the subject. Once the key is clean, I'll scale the character to match the scene, enable the 3D layer switch, and position the person directly on the road. Using the custom view and top view, I'll make sure the character sits naturally on the ground and aligns with the road's perspective. Small adjustments to the position, rotation, and scale help blend the subject seamlessly into the environment. Adding a moving foreground subject like this gives the scene an extra sense of life and scale, making the parallax animation feel much more immersive and cinematic. Next, let's enhance the scene with the lens flare. Enable the 3D layer switch and position it behind the mountain layer. By placing it farther back in 3D space, the mountain naturally blocks part of the flare, making the lighting feel much more realistic and integrated into the scene. Finally, I'll fine-tune its position, scale, and blending mode until it looks like the sunlight is shining from behind the mountains. With just a simple camera move and a well-positioned lens flare, our once flat image is transformed into a dynamic cinematic 3D scene. I'll start by creating a black solid and apply the fractal noise effect. By adjusting the scale to 300, we can create a soft, cloud-like texture that's perfect for fog. To animate it, open the evolution property, alt-click the stopwatch, and enter the expression. Time *5. This creates a slow, continuous movement, making the fog feel natural without the need for manual keyframes. Next, I'll change the layer's blending mode to screen, allowing the brighter areas of the fractal to blend seamlessly into the scene while keeping the effect soft and unobtrusive. Now I'll enable the 3D layer switch and position the fog within the scene. Using custom view and top view, I'll place it between the foreground and background so it adds depth without hiding important details. Finally, I'll create a mask to remove the fog from areas where it isn't needed and use a generous mask feather to blend the edges smoothly into the environment. This subtle atmospheric layer adds another level of depth and realism, making the entire parallax animation feel more cinematic and immersive. With everything in place, let's preview the animation. I'll press spacebar to play the timeline and check the overall movement. As the camera moves through the scene, Notice how each layer shifts at a different speed, creating a natural sense of depth. If anything feels out of place, now is the perfect time to make a few final adjustments. Once you're happy with the result, it's time to export. Go to Composition, Add to Render Queue, or use Adobe Media Encoder if you prefer exporting directly to MP4. Choose H.264 as the format. Select the high-quality preset, choose your output location, and click Render. H.264 provides an excellent balance between image quality and file size, making it ideal for YouTube, social media, and sharing with clients. After the render is complete, you'll have a high-quality MP4 file ready to upload or use in your next project. And that's how you transform a single image into a cinematic 3D parallax animation using Adobe Firefly and After Effects. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Smartistic tutorial.